I can't even hear my camera turned on.
If you've ever heard that sound before whilst playing Airsoft, you'll know it's the sound of an HPA, or high pressure air system, going off. And as of late, you'll know it's been the source of a little bit of controversy. Hollywood Sports Park in California also made waves last year with the outright ban of the HPA systems unless private parties were reserved. Many say the ban may have been as a result of a video showing Team Citadel, an airsoft group with a bad reputation of overshooting and disobeying the rules, drilling multiple people with their HPA systems. When the incident occurred, I wasn't shocked to hear that it was a notorious HPA system in use, as were many others. I had a long history of disliking the system, not due to rate of fire, however, but rather the annoyance of range they seem to provide for their users. But is it true? Today I asked a controversial topic: is HPA that bad? Does it ruin games? And if not, why might it have such a bad reputation in the airsoft community? I didn't want to go into this without any first-hand experience, though, so my first step was to go to my good friend Bushes, who was kind enough to let me play with his HPA system. My first impressions were of the weight of the tank on the back. It wasn't too much of an annoyance, but it was definitely there, and secondly, the line going to the base of the grip was a slight annoyance, but not enough to frustrate me on shoulder transitions. And my final observation was that the gear supporting the tank on my back was actually quite thick. More on that later. And secondly, the thing I noticed was just the reaction to my presence on the field with said gun. There was kind of an aura of worry about me suddenly using HPA guns, when in reality I was going to stick to my AEGs in the future. Once I got playing, however, things were relatively the same. Other than a light trigger response upgrade, I felt as though I was kind of using any other airsoft gun. It was possible to get high response time and more BBs per second in semi, but I didn't really feel like I needed to. And that seems to be people's primary grievances with the HPA system: the easy access to high rate of fire the system provides. Still though, you don't have to get an HPA build for high rates of fire. Dual sector gear setups and AEGs perform in similar function, as well as motor upgrades. And if an asshole wants to hurt people with his high rate of fire, he'll find a way. I'd always known this though, and instead my main gripe was with the range it seemed to provide to its user. And as it turns out, I was entirely wrong. Thanks to some Reddit users pointing me in the right direction, I discovered that mechanically HPA systems function the same to AEGs in regards to hop up, BB weight, and FPS when it comes to range. And the reason is quite simple. Airsoft guns function by shooting a puff of air or other gas at a BB to impact energy. An AEG does this by using gears and motors to pull a piston to produce that puff of air. An HPA gun simply releases that puff of air via a solenoid to impart that energy. From that point, the hop-up imparts backspin on the BB, and thanks to the Bernoulli principle, generates lift, which means that if you were to run a gun, normally at the same FPS, through an HPA system and a normal gear setup, that the BBs would land at close to the same spot. If you're interested in a very scientific look at airsoft guns and how they perform, make sure to check out the Airsoft Trajectory project. So, if HPA systems aren't actually ruining games by outranging everyone else on the field, then what's with all the grief for HPA systems? Why do so many people seem to think that if you got a line coming out of your gun that you're naturally kind of a bit of a dickhead? Well, one theory could come from psychology, and the idea that we naturally tend to hate things that are different from us. If most airsoft players fall into the AEG user category, then it would make some sense that some players could start to naturally hate the outer group, or HPA user category. This certainly felt the case when I tried out the HPA system for the first time. Still though, this explanation seems to exist kind of subconsciously, and I don't find it adequate myself. One theory I might posit is that airsoft just naturally kind of has some bad players in it. You know, they're a very small portion, but they may be the most vocal and the most remembered when it comes to dealing with bad players. It's also possible that the HPA system makes it easier for them to be, well, dicks. Spending about $800 and getting a good HPA setup to use for high rate of fire is a bit easier than installing dual sector gears in your AEG. I still don't really like this explanation, as there isn't very much data to prove it true. It's all simply speculation. Another theory in relation to gear this time. A common complaint I've heard leveled against HPA users is that they don't call their hits, and I've got yet another theory for that argument. In order to support the weight of the tank, many HPA users rely on thick plate carriers in order to carry them. Carriers like this can significantly muffle and lessen the impact of BB hits. Now with the sound of airsoft rifles going off. And it may just very well be that people with so much gear are having trouble calling their hits. Another reason based in psychology is our tendency to remember more of the bad than the good when it comes to dealing with others. You may have run into one or two bad HPA players, but because we naturally remember the negative more as a species, they stick out to us in our mind, so you start to associate the system with bad and toxic players. So where does all this information leave us?
HPA systems don't break games as much as many people think they do. They don't have some spectacular range advantage, and RPS gains can be gotten in AEGs just as much as they can be gotten in HPA systems. It may be possible that through in-group and out-group psychology and our tendency to remember the negative more than the positive, that we're associating vast swaths of the HPA community with bad players when really it is the minority. And it's also quite possible that because many HPA users are wearing heavy gear, that they are having trouble calling their hits, which may be why many accuse them of being cheaters, when in reality they are quite unknowing. And honestly, the real answer is that it's probably all these factors combined. We live in a world of gray. Very little of what we experience is ever certain. So next time you step onto the field and you see that notorious line going to some dude's back, just remember, chances are he's a good player just trying to enjoy his day. And in order to beat him, all you gotta do is flank him and shoot him in the butt. I hope you all enjoyed this little video essay. Links to my sources and the Reddit conversations are going to be in the description down below. And as always, have a great day and peace.